The car market has finally collapsed and the bottom is falling out. And while I'm over here on a Range Rover, Land Rover yard, obviously these vehicles are piling up at an alarming rate. They're not selling. Even with a lot of the incentives, they're offering loyalty discounts, all kinds of discounts, cash back, as well as major price slashes. I'm getting emails constantly from these vendors because I once part of the JLR group. Now they just keep pumping email after email after email, and they're hounding their clientele to try to buy these vehicles because a lot of these vehicles are just building up an inventory and not selling. And I even came from a Toyota dealership, and they have inventory starting to build slowly too. Even vehicles that some people took possession or they took the allocation, ordered it, it came in and they said, you know what, no, I declined. Because with Toyota, all you have to do is pay a small deposit, it comes in, and then you pay it off and you take the vehicle and it's yours. But even those Toyotas now, there's people, and I'm seeing vehicles, brand new Toyota 4Runners, actually at a local lot here that you could not get. They're not typically on the lot, but they're brand new because customers are starting to walk away from their purchases. I'm also seeing some of the Honda dealers. Some of these vehicles, the Civics, the Pilots, the CRVs, they were coming in mass shortages and you couldn't get them. Day supply with Hondas were typically in that 30, 40 days. And for Toyota, it's in that 30 to 50 day supply too as well. But now we're starting to see that slowly creep up. Now we're starting to see some brand new inventory sitting back and people rejecting what they had ordered because they realize the cost of living crisis is taking a toll and they can't afford to make the payments on that. So 6 months later, 4 months later, after the vehicle actually shows up, they decide, uh-oh. And this is real. People are struggling right now. Even with the 50 basis points the Fed's dumped off the top, it's still not enough. And people see the writing on the wall after getting signed up for a loan of 84 months. The reality is people understand now that's way beyond what I can actually afford or want to afford. Now the dust is settled, the reality sets in, inventory's rising, and it just seems the buying frenzy is sort of dissipating. We've also seen some of the most very popular models that you couldn't get for the last 2 years. Now they're starting to creep in and they're starting to sit on the car lots. But what's even more puzzling is they're not selling. Now that they're on the lot, slightly used, and people are not buying them because they can't afford it. Obviously, some of the finance rates are a little higher on used vehicles, so it just makes it out of the reach for a lot of people, but people don't want them. Also, we're looking at vehicles like Mercedes and even BMW. Now, sales are down in this last quarter, and we're starting to see the slump. The German manufacturers are struggling making sales, and even Volkswagen is in a world of hurt, trying to recoup $11 billion. They're looking at closing down plants, laying off workers, and the cost of living crisis is real in Germany as well, as they're even more under the gun of the EU and of some of the regulations. The transformation into electrification market puts a lot of those brands that overshot, like Volkswagen, in a world of hurt where a lot of buyers aren't buying these vehicles and they're clearly rejecting it. So it's happening in North America, it's happening in Europe, and it's happening everywhere. But a year ago, you couldn't even find a vehicle like this on the used lot. These vehicles were so highly sought after. These Fords, as you're looking right here, clearly we have a Raptor version of this, and it's a very nicely equipped. Obviously, it has the big fender flares and the steel step guards there and all the paint and the graphics. Raptor right there. You get the big wheel on the back. It is a very attractive looking full-size, mid-size SUV, obviously for off-roading. Has all of the logos and everything on it, which was the foundation for a lot of people that had to have them and had all the extra bling and all the extra features and looks and aggression and the flares. You could not find these anywhere on any lot. They were all outsold, oversold, and overcommitted, and you couldn't get them. And now I'm seeing them right there. Hondas, you're seeing extra vehicles like this, the high quality, low mileage vehicles like this, you would never see on used car lots. There you go. You're also seeing vehicles like this brand new Toyota Sienna, or slightly used Sienna, and it's a hybrid. So everybody knows Toyota's very low inventory levels because they weren't selling for the last two or three years. But here we go, a low mileage, high quality, unbattered, unbanged up version that's dry and hasn't been underwater, and yet it's been sitting on this lot for the last month. And the mainstream consumer sees the writing on the wall and is resisting the urge to buy a new car. But it's usually the enthusiast market that often suffers the first hit. Why? Well, because those are vehicles that are nice to have, not need to have. So you've got a Volkswagen Golf R here. It's a need to have. You don't need 300 horsepower. So these vehicles have been sitting. Civic SI, beautiful car, but it's been sitting here for 2 months. We see a Mustang. Also, Mustangs and even some of the Mopar stuff like the Challengers and Chargers aren't selling that quickly either, and even BMWs. And here we have convertibles. We know as we hit the winter season, this vehicle's not selling, and clearly is going to be sitting here a while, and it has already been sitting here a while. a lot of these specialty vehicles are also taking a back seat because people are now looking, instead of buying something that's all bling and flashy like this, that's costing well over $100,000, people are electing just to buy something that makes a little more financial sense. Toyota, those are still popular. Dodge, even though the quality's not, Stellantis is struggling with sales like that, but they're making choices to buy simpler vehicles, more mainstream vehicles, lower cost vehicles, like these little small SUVs, subcompacts. We're seeing a lot sales increase in a lot of late model subcompact SUVs and cars because those what people can't afford. People can't afford the premium vehicles anymore. People can't afford the big swanky SUVs or even a lot of the full-size pickup trucks. Now, while we're seeing truck sales up, what's not being told is the amount and the percentage of those being fleet vehicles, which they are, and that's holding the market together. Affordability continues to be the crisis here for a lot of people, not able to buy anything within their means. Obviously, even the smaller SUVs like this are obviously out of reach for many buyers these days. There was a time when the small subcompact SUV was well within your reach, but did you realize that the Mitsubishi Mirage is now the only vehicle that's under $20,000 US that somebody can actually afford to buy? Everything else has gone up to extreme levels and to numbers that most people can't afford. Remember, a lot of this now, people are starting, it's the writings on the wall with people extending some of their car loans out to as much as 84 or 96 months. It's a clear indication that people can't afford the money, so all they're doing to eliminate and reduce their monthly payment is extend the loan term out, and that has an obvious ill effect for long term. Because we are see repossession rates climbing at an alarming rate. People are giving back the keys to their vehicles. They're getting into these long-term loan periods. Then something comes up, turns up the apple cart, and they wind up, unfortunately, either out of work, their job loss, health issues, and of course, just a change in finances naturally now draw that money back, and they can't afford to continue making payments. We all expect subprime buyers to get into some financial heat. And while I know somebody personally in the business who is now lending to higher risk buyers, once you actually have a bad financial standing, then you can't even get a loan. Banks won't touch you. And the unfortunate part is this gentleman that I talked to who said that if you have a subprime rating, if you're at a credit score somewhere between 4 or 450, maybe even 500, they don't want to touch you. And even these high risk lenders are saying, look, we'll lend you this car so you can partially rebuild your credit, but we'll do it at a 29% interest rate. Or they'll give you a better discount if you're still a high risk buyer. If you're still a high risk borrower, they might give it to you about 25%, but a clear indication that these people have no intentions to even get outside a hawk. And that's now the way. Buyers look at buying a car now as throwaway. They don't expect to actually pay it off. And that's the way the old mindset is changing for a lot of buyers. People don't care anymore. They're willing to lose it, give it away, and watch that vehicle get towed away by the repo man. And it's really no surprise when you see full-size trucks like this Super Duty here that used to be basically a fleet and easy to get into to supply your work duties. You needed this for your work activities. You'd get into something like a Super Duty. This was typical. Look, you get the steel wheels on here. That's pretty basic. This is pretty basic too. Everything has lots of plastic here too. Plastic. Everything is clearly made for work duty. Steel rims. Look at that basic exhaust tip on there. They don't even spray an aligner, and of course there's no rear slider. But these vehicles aren't that cheap, and the Super Duty here with the 7.3 in it, and it's a 350 4x4 crew cab, and unfortunately this vehicle is going for a massive $83,000. And while you might think, okay, that's great for Super Duty, okay, gas job with rubber floors and plastic seats, not a great deal, but that's what people are paying, and they can't afford it. They can't even afford to go to work sometimes because of the price of these work trucks are getting out of hand too. And according to Kelley Blue Book, we've actually seen the average transaction price drop this last quarter down to about $48,000 and change, down about 0.5%, which is a clear indication that people are either buying cheaper vehicles or not buying anything at all. But the bottom line is prices are slowly creeping down. Now these buyers, instead of buying a full-size truck like this, they may be deciding to go with a small subcompact SUV or even a smaller car. Because you look at a truck like this, but it makes you wonder how the average is going down when trucks like this are on the lots. And who's buying a vehicle like this? Obviously, we have a full-size, this is an FX4 right here, Ford. You get the big wheels. It's pretty right there. You get this beautiful pearlescent paint. I must say it's very, very nice. Chrome door handles. You get the security feature inside there. And I do notice you get a big sunroof. The interior is absolutely very, very nice as well. You get the big leather seats, heated, cooled, ventilated, and the works. Of course, this one has the 6.7 liter Power Stroke, and it's a Platinum edition, so you know that's not going to be cheap. But with all the great wheels and the pearlescent paint and all of the great touches, how much is this truck actually going for? Well, let's just take a quick look. With all the goodness here, we are looking at a Ford Super Duty 24. This is an SRW single rear wheel, 4x4 crew cab, 6.7 liter high output diesel. It's got a whole pile of features. It has a whole pile of features in here, even with the fact that it's got all this goodness, all these features, all this tech, which most people don't really need. And I think that's part of the problem. People see all this new technology, all this shiny new features and toys and buttons, and they want it, but that's part of the problem. And I think there's this natural mind shift that people are going to start getting used to doing more with less. But this one here is $125,540. What? Like what? Porsche 911 territory? BMW M5 territory? Corvette Z06 territory? What's going on with these vehicles and the prices? But people are paying this apparently. But how is it then if we're seeing vehicle sales holding, there's a certain level of stability, even though we're seeing truck sales overall slightly sliding year over year, we're seeing this natural digression. Of course, Ford's bragging that they're selling more trucks than they have in a long time. GM saying between Chevy and GMC, they're selling more than Ford, and Ram just can't sell a truck to save their life. What we're seeing is sales are still going on, but a lot of that has to do with fleet sales, and a lot of the retail sales like you and I, Lunchbox Joe just can't afford to buy a lot of these new trucks. So a lot of them are going to work. A lot of these are going to companies, fleets, paying for the bills. Of course, if you have a Bobcat and you're putting that to work, you're going to need a full-size truck like this to do that work, to tow that Bobcat. So a lot of these vehicles are going to fleets. So how are the rest of these vehicles selling? Well, firstly, we're seeing the average transaction price dropping. Secondly, we're seeing massive incentives, the only thing keeping this market in place. Of course, heavy incentives on electric vehicles, that's what's driving the sales stability in the electric vehicle space. But according to Cox Automotive, a lot of the sales are only being held and stitched together by the fact that there's incentives on a lot of vehicles. As a matter of fact, 7.3% of the transaction price of a modern vehicle now is based on incentives. So these companies are slashing, the OEMs. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a Ford or if you're talking about a GM or Ram or just about every other manufacturer this side of possibly a Honda or Toyota are slashing their prices to get people in the door and pay for these expensive new vehicles. But what's going to happen when the market is clearly trending downwards? Unemployment rates rising. We're seeing states like Florida underwater, and of course the used car market's going to hurt there because a lot of the vehicles are going to be taken off the streets. There's going to be a reduced inventory there further again. But what's going to happen when the incentives run out, when these dealers can no longer offer any more to cut into their margins? We see what's going on with Nissan. In the first half of 2024, they lost 99% of their profits up in smoke. They're even debating buying out a lot of the smaller dealers that aren't making money and having the factories of the OEMs buy back some of the smaller networks and let the traffic just continually flow and reward the bigger dealers that are actually making a buck or two. And the market trends are not looking very positive. When you look at what typically happens in the cycles of the automotive industry, what generally happens is you get these rushes, you get these surges during vacation time, holiday season, and of course, specifically, summertime, it tends to slow down. But then come fall, as we get back into work, you get back from vacation, back in school, that's where we see this resurgence, but that's not happening. We didn't see that spike again. What we saw was just a leveling, and it's holding on. And the only reason it's holding on for dear life is because of these mass amounts of incentives that these dealers are offering up. Pull the incentives, these vehicles are not selling. And unfortunately, as these vehicles become more technologically advanced, they're becoming more problematic and recalls are spiking. Even the Ford Broncos are seeing a lot of issues with the 1.5s, and recalls are hitting them hard with the fuel injector issues. The F-150s, if you're talking 2014, some of the older variations, have an issue with the pinouts on the transmission, causing it to suddenly downshift at 60 miles an hour. There's a lot of recalls, and Ford's not exempt, but every manufacturer is struggling with it. Toyota's dealing with bad transmissions of the Tacoma. We're seeing issues, of course, with Toyota and their 3.4s, and every manufacturer is trying to push products out to market. And it feels to me personally, since 2020, what we're seeing is vehicles are being rushed out to market just to fill the space. And in doing so, there's corners being cut, challenges. There's being issues with more recalls and more problems and more time in the service shop. What that means is ultimately dealers are going to have to start to charge more to also take care of some of those recalls and those problems. But on top of it, as they transition to the electrification market, things are not going to get easier unless they find a solution for a cheaper battery source. What you're going to find is these internal combustion vehicles are going to continue climbing and rising in price to pay for this transition time to get over to electrified market. Another big problem that they're about to see, a lot of these manufacturers that are going to continue hampering the sales of vehicles. Doesn't matter, whether it's a Ford or Toyota. What's going to be a problem with these longer loan rates is that less and less people are going to qualify for these loan terms. Because what's happening now, because the interest rising in repossessions, not just subprime borrowers, but even prime borrowers are now starting to rise. We're seeing the numbers increase where people are now, who normally could afford to buy these vehicles, are now starting to default. And the repo man is so busy, they don't even have enough trucks and tow trucks to go out there and drag these vehicles off to auction to return the money to the rightful bank. That's a sad state of affairs. So a lot of banks are getting nervous. They're less likely and less inclined to lend money to people that are higher risk. So a lot of banks are struggling with the idea of giving money to anybody these days. But now, even here in Canada, and TD Bank allegedly has been on the hook now. They're being sued and they're being fined because of allegedly being affiliated with some cartels and illegal activity, which were happening right underneath their very noses. So the first action that a lot of buyers are taking is getting rid of these oversized tanks, these Ford Expeditions, which are heavier on fuel, more expensive, or skipping out on the electrification, or delaying or deferring the purchase of these vehicles, or even possibly saying, you know what, I don't need that sports car. The Ford Mustang would be a lot of fun, but we need something a little bit more practical and reliable. People instead are going with lower cost vehicles like the Escape and the 1.5s now that you have some of those recall issues. So people are electing to go with vehicles like these instead of going with those more premium models. They're scaling down. Hence, we're seeing that overall average transaction price dropping. So it's pretty clear the writing's on the wall with prices stabilizing, high incentives rising, just trying to get people in the door. Recalls, of course, are taking a toll. Banks getting shy to lend. People losing their jobs, and of course the fact that the cost of living crisis is taking a major toll. We're seeing all the writing. We're seeing the fact that the average transaction price is dropping. People are making choices to buy cheaper vehicles. People are fixing their old vehicles. People are making selections that don't include spending $80,000, $90,000 on a brand new pickup truck. Rather, people would rather try to put that money in their bank account. Of course, unemployment rates on the rise, and naturally the feds, even they are talking about dropping their interest rates even further. That's still not enough, because we're seeing, even with the incentives rising and these dealers trying to push their products by slashing off prices, giving 0% even when 0% doesn't exist, because the finance and the bank rates are much higher than that. They're still trying to give 0%. They're trying to throw in extras, trying to trim dollars or cash back just to get people to buy, because now we're at that 7.3% of that transaction price being incentivized. The fact remains is all the markings are on the wall. And if people aren't good at reading hieroglyphics, then they'll be definitely good at reading how bad the economy's getting and the fact that the car business is finally tanking.